What's up everybody, welcome back. In today's video we're going to take a look at smoothing out some stuff. We're going to extend the use of our option string in the game mode, and then we're going to make it so our endless wave game mode doesn't have respawning enabled, and when all players are dead we're going to return to the main menu, so that way we have our first gameplay loop completed as well. And then I think in the next video we're going to continue by setting up our lobby a bit better, so we have a button to kick players and a ready up button and probably a chat and things like that. So that's what's on with the next videos. If you like the series, please consider leaving a like, and you're welcome to join the Game Dev Raw Discord and talk about some game dev stuff or ask a question about a video. So with that out of the way, let's dive into today's video. So first of all, let's take a look at fixing a few things. Every now and then when we die, our blood overlay will stay on the HUD if we respawn, so we're going to take a look at fixing that. And by the way, I lowered my resolution from 1440 to 1080. I'm sitting a bit further away from the monitor if I have my mic in front of me, and I think it might be a little bit better to see on YouTube. So let me know what you guys prefer, if you want me to record in 1080 or 1440. So with that out of the way, let's open our in-game HUD and we're going to fix the blood overlay. So let's go to our event construct, and at the beginning we can simply make sure that we set the opacity so that we cannot see it. So let's drag in our image for the blood overlay, and then we're going to set the color and opacity. And then we can simply make sure that we don't see it anymore. So double click it and make it all zeros, and then we should be good to go. So we have our blood overlay issue fixed. The next thing I want to take a look at is the wave countdown. It's not counting down for me when I start the game, and I'm not sure if I screwed up myself or I actually screwed up in the video. But if we open our shooter game mode and then go to the event graph, then over here we have our start wave event, and I didn't connect the HUD start new wave event, so that's why we don't have a countdown. So we're simply going to disconnect it over here after the increment wave number, and then we're going to execute the for each loop, and from the completed pin we're going to set our enemy count. So with that connected, the countdown at the beginning should also work, and the new wave numbers should appear as well. So that's fixed. And then we have the spectator error. If we are spectating a player and the player dies, we get some errors about the player being not valid. So we can simply fix that for now by making sure we add a validated get, and then later if we're gonna use the spectator mode a bit more, then we can make it so we automatically switch to the next player if the current player is dead. So for now we're going to open our player controller, and that's the shooter player controller, and in here we have our event tick, and we want to make sure that we grab the attached player over here and we turn this one into a validated get as well, and then hook it back up and only continue if this is valid. So that way, for now at least, the error is gone. So compile and save that one. And then the last thing we're going to take a look at is the minion base character. So let's open up our minion base. And in here, the last thing I did in the previous episode to test some stuff a bit easier was disconnect this pin in the attack loop. So if you did that as well in the attack loop, stop movement immediately, we need to reconnect this pin over here. And then I want to take a look at the movement loop. So I'm going to grab my notes here quickly. So if we scroll up a bit further, we have our move to player loop over here. And at the beginning I added a delay of 2 seconds, so we might want to get rid of this entirely or at least lower it a whole lot. So I'm just going to set it to 0.1. And then I'm going to grab another validated get over here for my target player. So let's drag in the target player and turn this one into a validated get. Hook it up. And we want to make sure that our target player is alive if it's valid. So we're going to drag off and get is alive. And plug it in. And then grab a branch over here. So if the player is valid, we need to make sure he is alive, and if he is, we're good to go. So we're going to continue our move to player loop. So we actually need to get rid of this and plug in the validated get after the delay. And then if this is true, we're going to continue looping our move loop. So we're simply going to call this event again. And if this is false, we're going to reset everything. So first of all, we're going to grab in our target player. So in case he's not alive, we're going to reset him. And we can disconnect the is valid, the not valid pin here as well. And then we're going to call our onAI spawned event. So that way the AI will pick a new target player and start chasing that one. So that's the movement loop done, and then there's one thing I want to take a look at, and that is we go back to the attack loop event, and over here for the target player I also want to turn this one into a validated get. So right click, validated get, and hook it up. So we're only going to continue if this is valid, and if it's not valid, I think we're going to connect it. Then we're going to connect it to our branch over here. So we're going to set can attack to false and execute all of this logic. So we're going to pick a new character as our target. So that's the fixes and updates, and now everything should be a lot smoother in game. So now we're going to take a look at expanding the use of the option string in the game mode, so we can smooth things out a bit there as well. So in the previous video we started using the option string in the game mode, and I want to extend that use a little bit more. So first of all, I'm going to go into my game instance, and in here I'm going to create a new function to make an option string. So let's create a new function, call this make option string. And we're going to give it two inputs. Both of those are going to be strings, and the first one is called new option. So let's make sure it's a string, and then the second one is going to be the new setting. And we also want to create a new variable for this, and that's our option string. And again, that's a string. So that should be in place. Now for this function, we're going to drag in our option string, and we're going to append the string. So we're going to put more strings together. Then the first thing we want to add is a question mark. And then we're going to add another pin, and we're going to plug in our new option. Then we're going to add another pin, and we want the equal sign. And then for the last pin, we're going to plug in our new setting. And then we're going to drag in a setter for the option string, connect it, and simply hook up the return value. And then we can grab a return node. So now we can call this function and add one option each time and set the settings easily, and everything will be stored in the option string. So if we go back to the event graph, then we can go to the travel to map event. And first of all, let's drag in our option string over here. And I'm going to make a new one for the number of connected players. So let's call that num connected players, the same as the variable we already have. And then I'm simply going to plug in the integer from the event over here. So that's going to convert it into a string, and that should work fine. And then we're going to create a second option string. So let's duplicate this one, and this is going to be for the is solo game. So I'm going to call this is solo game. And then I'm going to simply drag in the boolean for the solo game and plug it into the string. So that will make it a string and make sure it says either true or false. So it doesn't say 0 or 1, but it says true or false. And then I'm going to do the same thing for the seamless travel. So copy and paste this one again, and we're going to use the use seamless travel. And again, we can simply plug in the boolean that we already have over here. So that's is seamless travel enabled. Plug it in, and it will convert it into a string for us. And then the last thing I want to do is set our game mode again. So that's what we did in the previous episode, our game mode endless wave over here. So we're going to copy and paste this again. And then we're going to set our game mode to endless wave. And that should build the option string for us. And then we have it stored in our variable over here, the option string. So now we can get rid of the number of connected players. We're not using that anymore over here. And we can delete the variable. So we're using it in the game mode, but we're going to get rid of it over there as well. So let's delete it and then make a little bit of room over here. So we can plug this in right after we call the travel to map event, and then we're going to call our execute console command. And we need to make sure that we plug in the option string into the C pin over here. So that will make sure that it gets passed on. And we can actually duplicate all of these nodes. So copy them, and then let's go all the way at the top over here to the start solo game event. And we can simply paste them in here. So let's grab a little bit of room, paste them in here. And for the number of connected players, I'm going to get rid of this one and simply say 1 over here. And then connect it up. And that should work as well. So now we need to go into our game mode and make sure all of these options actually are used. So let's open up our shooter game mode and start using our new options. So I'm going to create a new function first to actually get all of the options from the string. So let's call this set game options. And we're going to need a few new variables. So first of all, let's create a new boolean is solo game. So I just want to store this on the game mode as well as a boolean. And then I want to create another boolean, and that's is game mode ready. And for the last one, we need to compile it and make sure that it's false. So it actually is. So for the set game options event, let's make that one first. So we're gonna get our option string as an input. So let's create an input, and that's our game option string. And that needs to be a string variable. Oh, never mind. Okay. So then we are going to parse the options from there. So let's right click and get the game option string from the input. And drag over here, and we're going to parse an option. So first of all, let's get the game mode that we assigned. So that's the option called game mode. And we're actually setting this later in the event graph, and we're going to get back to this later in the video. So for now, let's not really do anything with it. We could print it to the screen, but that doesn't really help us. So we're going to get back to this later, but we have it in place. Then let's copy and paste it. And let's look for our second option, which is the number of connected players. So num connected players. And for this return value, we want to store it in our number of expected players variable. So let's drag that one in and let's connect it up. And make sure that we start our execution. So we have that variable set. And then we're going to continue with the solo game one. So let's copy and paste the parse option. And we're going to look for our is solo game. And from here we can switch on string. So let's get a switch on string. We do not really need a default. We're gonna use the true or false. And then we can simply continue from here by setting the boolean to the correct value. So let's drag in two setters. And if it's true, it's a solo game. And if it's false, it's not. So that's done as well. And we're going to do a similar thing for the seamless travel bool. So let's copy and paste this, including the switch on string. And make sure that we connect both of these. So we're going to get our use seamless travel. And then that will return the true or false as well. So we want to set our own custom seamless travel enabled boolean. So let's copy and paste that one twice. And we want to make sure that we also set the actual option on the game mode. So the class default over here, and that's called use seamless travel. So we also want to drag off here and set use seamless travel. And make sure we also set that one. So this is the true and the lower one is false. So we could clarify this and say this is the class default. And this is our own custom boolean. So then we know why we have 2 in here. And that's pretty much the entire function. So let's return from here. Okay, so we need a return node, that's fine. Now we can go back to the event graph, and I'm getting an error because we removed the number of connected players from the game instance, but we actually don't need the game instance in here anymore, so we can get rid of the get game instance and then the target number of connected players getter, and also the is solo game getter from the game instance. So all of this is in the event handle starting new player. And then we're gonna use the options that we got from the option string. So let me grab my notes quickly. We can simply plug in our is solo game boolean in here. So the number of expected players is already set, so we don't need a setter over here. And we can actually also get rid of this setter over here, because right now it should have the correct value in there, so we don't need to override it anymore. So that's for the solo game branch where we set it to 1. You can get rid of that setter. And then over here, so right before the is solo game boolean, I want to add a branch and make sure that our game mode is ready. So we're going to drop in the game mode ready boolean, and then we're going to grab a delay over here, and if this is false, we're going to wait for 0.1 second. Oh really? And then we're going to check again, and if it's true, we're going to continue. So let's hook this up like so. And then if we go to our begin play, we also have a cast to our game instance, and we don't need that one anymore either, so we can just get rid of this entirely. And the first thing we want to do is grab our set game options function, and we're going to hook it up and make sure that we pass on our option string. And if we simply right click in our game mode and get our option string, so that's in here by default, and we can hook it up, and that should pass on the correct options. And then we, once this is done, we're going to drag in our is game mode ready boolean and set this one to true. So this is pretty much only for the solo game. If we launch in solo, the actual player controller will sometimes connect before begin play fires. And to catch that, we have this boolean in place. If we actually play multiplayer, we don't even need this, but since we want both to work, I added it in here. So now if we compile, we got rid of the error and everything should work. So we're going to test this, and if all of this is working, we're going to make sure that we set up our endless wave game mode. So I started up a multiplayer game, and I added some prints in the set game options function, so that way the server will print all of the options to the screen, so we can see if they load correctly as well. So there we have it: use seamless travel false, solo game false, non-connected players 2, and the selected game mode is endless wave. So all of that seems to be working, and our AI is actually spawning, and all of that seems to be good as well. So I do notice we messed up the color for the blood overlay by not setting it for the back to 1 for the opacity, so we need to take a look at that as well. So let's return, and we're gonna set up the respawning for the endless wave game mode, so we're going to disable it and make sure we have some kind of a survival game mode where we want to reach the highest wave possible, and if we are dead we can spectate other players till everybody else is dead, and then we're going to return to the lobby menu or to the main menu if we play a solo game. So first of all, let's dive into our HUD and fix the color issue. So for the in-game HUD, let's go to the graph, and over here I didn't actually mean, or I did mean it, but I didn't need to set all zeros. So we want all of these to be 1 and only alpha to be 0, and then that should be good to go. So compile and save that one. Now we're going to set up the disabling for the respawning on the endless wave game mode. So first of all, let's go to our framework folder, and I want to create an enumeration for all of the game modes that we're going to use to make our lives easier later on. So we're going to create a blueprint enumeration, and these are our game modes. And let's open it up. So we can only add one right now, and that's our endless wave. And then we can save it and close it down, and let's go to our shooter game mode, and inside here we're going to add that same variable. So we're going to create a new one, and that's our game mode, and that's of the game modes type that we just created. And then we want to make sure that we set it inside of our set game options function. So we just created this function. At the beginning we grabbed our game option string game mode, but we didn't really do anything with it yet. So I added a string, a print string, but you guys didn't. So I'm going to drag off the return value and I'm going to switch on string. So for this will return the endless wave that we put in here. So I'm going to get rid of the default and grab the endless wave string. So let me check in the game instance if that is spelled correctly, with or without a dash. So without, so we should be good over here. And then we're going to drag in our game mode enumeration and set it to the endless wave, and then continue. So right now we do not actually have a lot of options to set, but this will be useful later on. So let's compile and save and go back to the event graph, and then if we go at the end of our event handle starting new player, so all the way at the end at the completed pin for the for each loop, right now we switch on a string from the option string. So we're going to get rid of this and we're going to use our game mode enumeration and switch on that. So we only have one option, so we're going to start our endless wave and then plug this back into the completed pin. So that's good to go as well. Then the next thing we want to do is go into our shooter player controller and make sure that the player controller knows if we can respawn or not. So let's close this down, open our shooter player controller, and in the event graph I'm going to create a new replicated event. So let's look for a bit of room. So custom event, and that's going to be a server is respawn enabled. So we need to make sure this is replicated to run on server, and then we're going to grab our game mode and cast to our game mode. So we did that a few times in here, so let's grab it and paste it. So if we have our game mode, we're going to get our game mode enumeration. And from here we can switch again. So switch on enum, plug this into the cast over here. And then we're going to create a boolean. So that is respawn enabled. And we need to make sure this boolean is replicated. So on the right side, replicated. And then we can simply set it for the correct game modes. So right now we only have one, and we're going to make sure that it's disabled. So that's the function that we need, and then we probably want to call that somewhere. So we're actually going to call it inside of our player type menu, so that the way we actually grab the value at the moment the player died. So let's open our widget player died menu, and we're going to change some stuff in here anyway. So let's go to our event construct, And let's move this over. So right now we want to make sure that our player controller over here calls our server function. So server is respawn enabled. And this is on construct. So as soon as we construct the player died menu, the boolean on the player controller will be set to the correct value. And we actually want to disconnect this. I'm sorry. And for this one, we're going to use pre-construct and hook it up over here. And then for construct, what we're going to do is grab the branch from our player controller, because then it should be set. Pre-construct fires before construct. So we're going to grab our player controller, and then we can get our boolean. So is respawn enabled. And if we have that boolean over here, we can simply grab a branch. And if it's not enabled, we're going to get rid of our respawn button. So let's grab our button respawn. And this is simply going to be removed from parent. So remove from parent and hook it up to the false pin. And then to make things a little bit more clean, I'm also going to remove one of the spacers, but I need to make sure that it's a variable for that. So we are talking about these buttons in the back over here. So we have button respawn, that's the one that we are removing, and I want to remove this spacer as well. So I'm going to give it a name, spacer respawn, and then make it a variable on the top right over here. And then for the border that's covering all of these buttons, I want to make sure, so that's the border default buttons, and I'm gonna set size to content, so that way if we remove this button, the border will shrink and it will look a lot better. So compile and then go back to the graph. So we remove the button respawn, and I'm gonna remove the spacer as well. So that's good to go for event construct. And then we also want to go into our show spectator controls function, and right at the end over here we also want to make sure that we remove the button if respawn is disabled. So we can pretty much go to the event graph and just copy all of this stuff, go back to the show spectator controls, paste it in over here, and then hook it back up. So this time we want to remove our horizontal box for the respawning. So we're going to delete this, and we're going to grab in our box. Let me see, did we already turn that into a variable? So this time we want to actually remove the other controls. So if we go back, we want to remove the red controls over here, and we want to remove the respawn button here. So let me see. So we didn't turn this into a variable yet. So if you select this button, it's inside of a horizontal box, and we want to remove the entire horizontal box. So I'm going to turn this into a variable, horizontal box respawn, and enable variable on the top right over here. And then we can go back, and we want to drag that one in and remove it from the parent. So that's inside of the show spectator controls function. So then we can compile and save that one as well. And then the border default button set to size content, we already did that one. So now we can go into our spectator and make some changes in there. So we removed the R2 respawn from the widget, but that's not actually where we are handling the input. So if we go to our BP spectator blueprint, so in here we have the input events and we have the R for respawn. So we want to make sure that we only respawn if we actually can respawn. So we can use our shooter player controller and simply drag off here and get the is respawn enabled. And plug that into a branch, so that way we can only respawn if we are allowed to. And we got that issue fixed. So that should pretty much set everything up. Now we are going to create a widget for when we have a game over screen, so we can display something and that looks a little bit better probably. So right click in the widgets folder, create a new user interface widget blueprint. And we might as well duplicate one, by the way. So let's get rid of this one. And I'm simply going to grab my pause menu because there's not a whole lot in there. And I'm going to duplicate it. So that's going to be my GameOver menu. And let's open it up. So the title is going to be GameOver. And then I'm simply going to say you survived for how many rounds you survived, and that's going to be pretty much everything. So we don't really need buttons in here. Let's get rid of those. And I'm going to grab a border, drag it on top of here, grab some text, put it inside of the border, and this is going to be my text, survived waves. And that's going to be a variable, and then I'm going to say you survived 0 waves. So for the border, let's give it some correct colors. And then I'm going to size it to the content and make sure that it's anchored to the center of the screen. So align it and set this one to 0.5. And then we're going to raise it up a little bit, so 150 maybe, minus 150, something like this. So for the font, let's make sure that it looks a little bit better. And then for the text color, so I'm not sure what happened to my colors, so let me do it like this. And this is the text color, so that should be the bright one. And then we have the border, and that should be the dark one, and that should be good. So now we can go into the graph, and we need to create a simple function to set our text, so we can get rid of all of this stuff. And we don't really need the shooter GameInstance in here as well, so let's get rid of that one. And then we're going to create a new function and call it setText survived waves. So we're going to give this one input, and that's an integer, and that's the waves survived. Turn it into an integer. So we're going to grab our text in here and set the text. And we can simply hook it up. And that should be good to go. So I'm going to expand this and disable grouping, but I don't really expect people to reach round 1000, so you probably don't need to do that. And then we're going to return, and that's the entire function, and that's the entire GameOver menu for now as well. So with that done, we can go into the shooter player controller and start using it. So let's open our shooter player controller, and in here we're going to make some changes inside of the UI show player died menu. So we want to make sure that the last player that died doesn't get the actual player died menu on screen. And because this is executed when the spectator pawn is possessed, we actually run into some problems if we don't just disable it right away. So the easiest thing we can do in this function is get all of the players. So we're going to right click, get all actors of class. And we want to get all of our hero base characters. So we're going to store these in a local variable. We're not going to store them in a local variable. We're just going to grab a for each loop, plug it in over here, and make sure that we hook this up as well, by the way. So we want to know if these players are alive, so we're going to get the isAlive booleans from them. And then we are going to create a local variable to count them. So let's hook this up to a branch, and then we're going to create the local dead players variable. So local dead players, and that's an integer. So if this player is dead, we're going to increase this integer. So drag it in here, increase it, and hook it up to the true pin. Then if this entire loop is done, we need another branch to check if all of the players are dead, or actually all except one, because for the last one we want to block this event. So we're going to drag off the outcome actors over here and get the length of this array. And we want to compare it to the amount of dead players. So let's plug that in. And if we are the last player that dies, we are not going to display the player died menu at all. So let's hook this up over here. So then we want to drag in our HUD reference. So let's get the in-game HUD and we want to check if this is valid. And if that's valid, we're going to remove it from parent. So drag off here, remove from parent, hook that one up to the is valid. And this is going to be after the true pin and also after the false pin from the branch over here. So then let's move this over a little bit. So let's make sure I do this correctly. So from the false pin we remove the HUD and then we continue by creating our player died menu. And from the true pin we only remove the HUD and then we're simply going to go to the return node because we don't want to do anything else. So that's good to go. We have the changes here done. Then we're going to go to the event graph and set up a new event to show the game over screen to the players that do need to see it. So let's right click over here and we're going to create a custom event. So call this show game over screen. And we're going to make this replicated to run on the owning client and we're going to give it an input and that's the waves survived. So that's our integer. First thing we want to do in here is remove all the widgets from the screen. And then we're going to create the game over menu. So right click and create a new widget. Plug it in over here. Let's select our game over menu. And the owning player is going to be a reference to ourselves. So plug that in as well. Then we're not going to store this as a variable because this game is going to be over in a few seconds. So there's no need to. But we're going to set the text for the survived waves on the game over menu. So drag off it and set the text. That's the function that we created. So we can plug in the waves survived from the input over here. Oh, really? There we go. And then the last thing we do need to do is add it to our viewport. So drag off it again and add to viewport. So we can actually see it. And that's done as well. So now if we go into the shooter game mode, we need to make sure that the game mode knows when to end the game as well. So let's open our shooter game mode again. And in here, first of all, let's create a new event. And this is going to be for our game mode endless wave. So let's right click, custom event. So give it a prefix, game mode endless wave, and then game over. So this is the event that's going to be executed when the game is over. So first of all, we're going to grab a for each loop and we're going to plug in all of our connected controllers. So for all of the connected controllers, we want to show our game over screen. So we can drag off the array element and actually just call that function. So show game over screen. And for the wave survived, we have a variable on our game mode. So if we look over here, we have the game mode endless wave number. So that's the current wave we're in. I'm gonna subtract one of it because we probably didn't survive the current wave. And then that's the result that we're gonna plug in our show game over screen. So make sure this is hooked up to the loop body. And then if this is done, I'm simply going to wait for a few seconds so the players can look at their achievement. And then we're going to return to the lobby or the main menu, depending on if it's a multiplayer game or a solo game. So we have a 3-second delay, and then I'm going to grab a branch in here and plug in my isSoloGame boolean. So this really should have pretty much said is online game, because we can play solo in an online game. The only difference is we are not online, but whatever, for now this works. So if it's a solo game, we're going to execute a console command to return to the main menu. So right click, execute console command, and that's going to be server travel main menu map. So server travel and then main menu underscore map, and that's a capital M, by the way. And then for the specific player, we can just get our player controller at index 0, and that's good to go. We are the server, so when the server does this and gets his player controller, then it will pull the clients with him. And for the full spin, we're going to do the same thing, but this time we're going to travel to the lobby menu map. And that's all we need to do in here. So connect it to the full spin. Then we're going to create a function in here as well, and that function will count the amount of dead players and then tell if the game is over. So we're going to call this GameMode endless wave player died, and we can call this every time a player died. So GameMode endless wave player died. And for this one, we don't really need an input, so we're simply going to grab all of our player controllers and grab a for each loop again. So hook this up over here. And then we want to get the controlled pawn from here. So get controlled pawn. And first of all, we're going to try casting this to our hero base character. So cast to hero base. Plug this into our loop body. So if this is true, we can use our isAlive boolean. So get isAlive. And then simply grab a branch, plug it in here. And we're going to count this using a local variable again. So let's create one local variable, local dead player count. And that's an integer. So drag it in here, and if this, there we go. So if the player is not alive, we're going to increment this integer. So let's hook this up to the full spin and increment it. And then if the cast is actually failed, we can also be a spectator pawn. So let's drag off the control pawn again, and we're going to cast it to our BP spectator. Hook this up to the cast failed, and in this case there's no boolean to check. If we're spectating, we're probably dead, so we're going to plug in this directly to the increment int as well. And then with that out of the way, we can hook up a branch to the completed pin and compare the number of dead players to the size of our player controllers array. So let's drag in our dead player count and let's compare it. And then we're going to drag in the connected player controllers and get the length of our array and hook this up over here. So if these match up, then all players are dead, and then we can call our GameOver event. So let's drag off the true pin and call GameOver. So the event we created in the event graph, and if that's false, then we can simply return and wait for the next player to die. So that's the event over here. Then we only need to make a few small changes in the hero base character, and then we should be done. So let's jump into the characters folder and open our hero base character. And the only thing we need to add in here is right after the take damage event. So let's look for that one. So we have the interface event take damage, and we have a branch over here for when we die. So isAlive is set to false, and then we have our get dead montage, and after that we have the multicast event for the impact. So after that we already determined we are dead, so our health is 0 and our boolean is set to false. So in this case we are also on the server because we have this interface set up to run through the server. So we can use this spot in the graph to simply get our game mode. And we do need to cast it, so let's cast it to our shooter game mode. And from here we can call our player died event. So that's the game mode endless wave player died. And that will handle the rest for us. So it will simply count the amount of dead players, and if that's equal to the players in the game, then it will stop the game. So now we should be good to go. So let's have a little look if this is working. I'm going to load a multiplayer match and then I'll be back with you guys. So the game is loaded. I'm going to grab one of the players and make sure that he dies. Then I should not be able to use the respawn options. So then I can only spectate the other player, and we have to wait till he gets killed as well. And then we should return to the main menu. So we have the colors for the HUD fixed, so that's good. Okay, we do not have a respawn button, so that's fine. I'm going to spectate the other player, and in here we can also not respawn, so that's good. And now we have our game over screen, and the only thing that's not really working is the amount of numbers survived. And I actually know why, because we didn't use a format text over here. So I think this is not really broken, but it's just a mistake. I'm gonna go to the game over screen. So we use this as a variable, you survived 0 waves, but in the actual function where I set the text, I only put the amount of waves, the integer, into the input. So over here we need to disconnect it and grab a format text node. And then we can simply say you survived, and then open bracket A, close bracket, and then waves. Oh, that's not the correct spelling for waves. There we go. And then we can plug this into the input, and now the text should actually work. So that's good to go. So we have our first game loop completed. We can spawn, we can respawn, or we can't in this instance actually, but we can die and the game is over. So in the next episode we're going to fine tune our lobby a bit better and make some improvements in there. If you liked the video, please consider leaving a like, and if you like the channel, please consider becoming a member or check out the Ko-fi page if you want to make a small donation. And if you don't want to do any of that, you're still welcome to join the Game Dev Raw Discord and talk about some game dev stuff or ask some questions. So thanks for watching everybody, talk to you later, bye bye.